Welcome to Life Stories, where the moments we try to hide often become the stories that heal us most. Imagine being laughed at by your own family, only to have a billionaire walk into the room and call you his wife. That's what happened to Emily Carter. She was a waitress. They called her a failure, a joke. She wasn't even supposed to be at the reunion dinner. But what they didn't know was that the man who just stepped out of the black Rolls Royce was hers. And what happened next left an entire room speechless. Why did she keep him a secret? What happened that night in the diner 2 years ago that changed both their lives forever? Stay with us. You're about to hear a story of quiet strength, unexpected love, and what happens when someone finally says, I see you. Don't forget to subscribe to hear the rest of today's story. The sharp snap of a wine glass meeting porcelain pierced through the laughter like a gunshot. Emily Carter sat at the very end of the long reunion banquet table, the seat no one wanted, the one closest to the exit. She hadn't planned to come. She wasn't supposed to be there. The only reason she showed up was because Grandpa Joe had personally asked her. And now she regretted saying yes. She's just a waitress, her older brother Brandon said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. That voice, that smug tilt in his tone, it hadn't changed since they were kids. A ripple of soft snickers followed, barely masked behind wine sips and napkin dabs. Why does she even need a seat at the table? Someone added with a dry laugh. Maybe it was Aunt Carol? Maybe it was Tiffany, Brandon's fiancée, who was already halfway drunk on imported rosé and self-importance. Emily stared at her untouched salad, pretending she didn't hear. She wore the nicest thing she owned, a cream blouse she'd ironed twice, her best pair of jeans, and polished ballet flats. But nothing she wore would ever be enough. Not here. Not to them. She worked at Maple Street Diner, served coffee to lawyers by morning, and wiped ketchup off booths by night. But the shame in their eyes wasn't the job. The shame was that she'd stayed in it, that she didn't marry up, didn't chase the illusion of success, or drown herself in student loans for a degree she didn't want. She chose simplicity. She chose authenticity. And in this room full of curated lives and filtered perfection, that made her disposable. Tiffany leaned in from across the table, a sugary smile glued to her lips. Emily, sweetie, aren't you usually working night shifts? How'd you find time for family? Emily raised her eyes. She remembered Tiffany. She once left a $1 tip on a $48 tab and asked for lemon water with real lemons, not those sad diner slices. I came because Grandpa Joe invited me, Emily replied calmly. Her voice didn't waver, but her jaw tightened. You shouldn't have. Margaret Carter, her mother, murmured as she straightened silverware that didn't need straightening. This is a family celebration. I am family, Emily said, softer now, almost childlike. Barely, Brandon muttered, leaning back, smirking. You're like the mascot, someone we tolerate for laughs. The heat behind Emily's eyes pulsed. But she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She reached for her fork, her hand trembling, not from weakness, but from the sheer weight of every condescending glance, every scooted chair, every inch she'd been pushed to the edge of belonging. Then, just as she began to rise from her chair, ready to excuse herself and disappear into the night, it happened. The sound of tires crunching over gravel. The room didn't notice at first, but then headlights pierced through the tall glass doors of the private event space. A collective hush fell, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Forks froze midair. Conversations died. Someone gasped. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom rolled to a smooth stop outside. Tiffany's hand gripped Brandon's arm. Whose car is that? She whispered, eyes wide. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. 6'2", sharp tan skin, a dark navy suit tailored to a body built from intention, not vanity. He walked with quiet command, not the kind of man who demanded attention, but the kind who simply owned the room the moment he entered it. He walked straight to the entrance and paused, scanning the table. Then he smiled. Emily, he said, his voice deep, calm, intimate. Her name didn't sound like shame on his lips. It sounded like reverence. Gasps erupted, chairs shifted, heads turned. Emily stood slowly, all eyes on her, The man walked forward, unbothered by the storm of stares. "Sorry I'm late, baby," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. Traffic was hell. And then, in front of everyone, her mother, her brother Tiffany, he reached for her hand and kissed it. Tender, familiar, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Who is he?" someone stammered. Emily looked directly at Brandon. "He's my husband." Silence detonated. No one breathed. Tiffany blinked like she'd forgotten how. Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came. Aunt Carol clutched her pearls like they were slipping. But none of them, not a single soul in that pristine room, had any idea what was coming next. They didn't know who he really was. They didn't know why she had kept him a secret. They didn't know the story behind the kiss, behind the handhold, behind the woman they never truly saw, until now. And just as she and her husband turned to leave the stunned table behind, a voice cut through the silence. "Wait," said Grandpa Joe. He rose slowly, placing a steady hand on the table as he looked around the room. "Do any of you even know who this man is?" Everyone turned. Even Emily stopped. Grandpa's eyes swept the crowd. "You want to know how Emily, the waitress you all sneer at, married a man who earns more in a day than most of you do in a year?" Emily's heart pounded. She didn't want a scene. But Grandpa Joe wasn't done. "I knew," he said. "I've known all along. She didn't hide him out of shame. She didn't tell you because she didn't want your fake smiles or conditional respect. She wanted love, not approval." The truth landed like thunder, and none of them knew how to recover from it. But that was just the beginning. What do you think Emily's family will do now that they know the truth? Do you believe it's ever too late for people like Brandon or Margaret to change? Follow along for part 2 to see what happens after the mask of judgment finally cracks, and whether love alone is enough to heal years of silence. Emily didn't look back. With Nathan's hand wrapped gently around hers, she walked out of the room like someone who had just reclaimed her name. The shame that had sat on her shoulders for years, the kind woven into every family gathering, every whispered judgment, had evaporated in the span of a heartbeat. And yet, as the doors to the banquet hall clicked shut behind her, she could still feel their stares clinging to her back like smoke from a fire that was no longer burning. Nathan opened the passenger door of the Rolls. She slid in without a word. The cabin was quiet, cocooned in buttery leather and soft jazz that played on the stereo. The moment the door closed and the outside world was muted, Emily exhaled for the first time that night. "You okay?" Nathan asked as he started the engine. She nodded, swallowing the tightness in her throat. "I just didn't expect you to actually come." He glanced sideways, lips tugging upward. "I told you, I wasn't about to let you face them alone." She turned her face to the window as city lights blurred past. "You always show up when I least expect it. And always when it matters," he said, gently reaching for her hand. They drove in silence, the kind that's full, not empty. Full of things unsaid, of emotions too big for words. It was a silence that didn't demand anything from her. And for a woman who had grown used to constantly explaining herself, that silence felt like home. Her phone buzzed. 6 missed calls, 14 unread texts. All from her mother, Brandon, a few cousins whose numbers she hadn't saved in years. She turned the screen off. She didn't need to read them. She already knew the tone. Sudden regret, sudden curiosity, sudden desperation. People always remember your worth once someone valuable has already seen it. They pulled into a quiet street where red brick townhomes lined both sides like a forgotten corner of Boston. Nathan parked outside one with ivy crawling up the side and lights glowing warmly through sheer curtains. Inside, Emily kicked off her shoes and sank into the couch. Nathan poured tea from the pot he'd prepared earlier, adding a slice of lemon the way she liked it. He handed her the mug without a word. She looked at him. "Tell me something." He raised an eyebrow. "If tonight didn't happen, if you hadn't shown up and no one knew who you were, would it have changed anything about how I see myself?" Nathan sat beside her, thoughtful. "You want the truth?" "No," she said, eyes soft. "But it still hurts. That it took a billionaire walking through those doors for them to pause long enough to see me." He nodded, jaw tight. "They didn't make you who you are. You did. Emily smiled faintly. That's not entirely true. They taught me what I didn't want to become. He chuckled softly and brushed her hair back from her face. So now what? You want to go no contact? She sipped the tea. I don't know. Maybe. I think I just need time. He didn't push. He never did. Instead, he pulled her gently into his arms and whispered, You are never just a waitress, Emily. You're my wife. You're my calm. You're everything I didn't know I needed until that night at the diner. Her breath caught. The night it all began. It had been raining, the kind of cold, unforgiving downpour that made the world feel twice as heavy. She was getting ready to close up at Maple Street Diner when a tall man in a soaked overcoat stumbled in and slid into the farthest booth. She didn't think much of it until she saw his hands. Trembling, his chest rising too fast. The panic wasn't loud, it was buried, but she'd seen it before. Hey, she'd said, kneeling next to his booth. You're having a panic attack, aren't you? His fingers twitched. He didn't speak, just gave the smallest nod. So she sat across from him, poured him a cup of coffee, and stayed. 22 minutes. Not for a tip, not for his name, just to help him breathe. He'd left a $500 tip that night with a note that simply read, Thank you for seeing me. She hadn't realized who he was until 2 weeks later when she saw his face on the cover of Forbes. By then, he'd already come back to the diner, just to see her again. And now, he was her husband. She was still the same girl, with nothing to prove, but everything to protect. The next morning, Emily opened her inbox to find a message from her mother. Not a wall of excuses, not the usual passive-aggressive phrases dipped in artificial sugar. Just this. Emily, I saw the interview. I saw how proud he is of you. How proud I should have been. I didn't know how to love a daughter who walked a different path, but I was wrong to judge you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you'll let me earn it. Can we start over? Emily stared at the screen. She didn't know how to feel. Was it real? Was it guilt? Was it performance? But part of her still wanted to hope. Would you trust someone again if they only valued you after the world did? Stay tuned for part 3, where Emily faces the hardest question of all. Can love rebuild something once broken by silence? Emily didn't reply to the email right away. She read it once, then again, and again. Each word felt like it was testing the walls she had built around her heart. It wasn't a perfect message. There was no "I'm sorry" written outright. But there was something more rare, accountability trying to be born. Nathan found her sitting at the kitchen counter, laptop open, eyes unfocused. You okay? He asked gently. She turned to him, unsure how to put it into words. I think I want to meet her. Just her. No fancy dinner. No audience. Just mother and daughter. He searched her expression. Are you sure? No, Emily said, but I want to try. They met 2 days later at the city garden near the Riverwalk, a place quiet enough for hard conversations and open enough for fresh air. Margaret Carter stood near the fountain, clutching her purse with both hands like it might run away if she let go. Her heels sank slightly into the grass, her face pale beneath carefully applied makeup. She looked smaller than Emily remembered, or maybe Emily had just grown. When Margaret spotted her, she didn't smile, not right away. Her eyes welled, but her voice held steady. I don't know where to start. Don't start with excuses, Emily replied, her voice kind but firm. Her mother nodded slowly. I won't. Just thank you for agreeing to meet me. They sat on a bench by the water. For a moment, the world moved around them. Children laughed, dogs barked, joggers passed by. But for Emily and her mother, time slowed. I missed you, Margaret finally said. I missed the idea of who I thought you used to be, Emily answered, eyes forward. But I'm willing to get to know who you are now, if you can accept who I am. Margaret looked down at her hands. He's good to you, she said after a moment. He's kind, Emily replied. He listens. He's never once made me feel like I had to be someone else. Margaret nodded, lips trembling. I envy that. Emily didn't respond. Some things didn't need answers. Some wounds simply needed space to breathe. That afternoon, they talked. Not about the past, but about the people they were now. Margaret admitted to her fears, her disappointments, how she projected them onto her daughter. thinking it was protection. I didn't know how to raise someone who didn't follow the script, she said. I didn't need you to raise me perfectly, Emily replied. I just needed you to see me. A week later, Emily returned to Maple Street Diner, not because she had to, because she wanted to. The clink of ceramic mugs, the soft hum of the fryer, the smell of fresh coffee, it grounded her, reminded her of who she was before titles and whispers tried to steal her worth. Behind the counter, she refilled a regular's cup when the door chimed. She turned. Brandon stood there. Jeans, no fiancé, just him, holding a cheap bouquet of supermarket flowers and looking like a boy who'd just been told he got it all wrong. I came to say I'm sorry, he said, for what I said, for how I treated you. Emily didn't speak. I don't expect anything, he added. I just wanted you to know. You didn't change, and you still turned out better than all of us. She let the words hang in the air. Then she nodded. Thanks. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. Outside, Nathan waited in the car, watching through the windshield. You ready? He asked as she slid into the passenger seat. Not yet, she said, glancing back at the diner. 1 more minute. She stared at the place that had once smelled like fryer oil and spilled milkshakes, and now smelled like roots, like memory. My beginning, she whispered, my anchor. Then she looked at Nathan. My now, my forever. They could whisper. They could doubt. They could shift in their seats and rearrange their opinions to fit the new narrative. But none of them would ever define her again. She had built her life from scratch, from grit, from grace, from sleepless nights and quiet dignity, and the most radical thing of all, she had stayed kind. She had stayed real. She had stayed Emily. What would you have done if you were Emily? Would you have forgiven your family or walked away for good? If this story moved you in any way, comment 100 below to let us know you are here. I'd love to know what country you're watching from. Drop your flag or location in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded. Your worth isn't defined by anyone but you.